Okay, so a few weeks ago I was at Megaplex and I was invited to participate in a PowerPoint party, which some people know about and some people don't, but it's just you make PowerPoints. You just kind of go. Some of it's memes, some of it's hyperfixations, some of it's just blah blah blah, but it's just like fun to just fuck around and have people publicly present. I would have never imagined choosing to go to a party where you do public speaking as a bit, essentially. Even though I do video essays and all this let's plays and so on, and I at this point have weirdly been kind of doing a form of public speaking as a job for like the last decade. I would shit myself whenever I had to do a presentation in front of class back in school, and that was always upsetting. And this was also stressful, but I figured I'd go through my PowerPoint and show you guys what I made because people were curious about that. And sure, why not? Just know that you're not getting quite the full experience, which is me being nervous as shit in front of a bunch of drunk people while also being a bit drunk. And also, I want to disclaim this by saying also that this is not a rigorously researched and written thing. It was just for fun in front of some people. So there's, I don't know, there's probably like three pieces of misinformation in this slideshow. Have fun spotting them. I don't know where they are. It's not a real number. So before me, Dax Horror Buns did his presentation, which was stop asking him to play Deltarune, which immediately sets a very different tone than I went for with mine. But he did this dumb Toby Fox pun and so on. Ironically, Dax's sense of humor in this slideshow was very Deltarune. So if he ever plays Deltarune, he'd actually probably like it. Whoops. There's a bit where he's using all the different stupid animations that Photoshop or that a PowerPoint can have, and one of them had the text on the screen just like slowly rotate around the whole screen, and then instead of successfully leaving, it just ended where it started, but upside down. And then it just cut to the next slide, the animation having accomplished nothing. And I'm like, that is such a Deltarune joke. You have no idea. You're missing out. But whatever. He doesn't want people to keep asking him to play Deltarune. Sure. Whatever. And then I was next. And I was immediately worried because I made a much more earnest and long PowerPoint about a genuine fixation of mine at some point. So I made this slideshow called Whatever Happened to Guitar Hero, the loudest 5 years in video games according to a hater. We'll get to what hater means in this context, but as we go through. But I was thoroughly invested in the guitar game craze as it came and went in the United States for far longer than the majority of people, because most people just played Guitar Hero 3, but I was like fully invested throughout the process in past its death. And so here's what I remember. This is mostly based on memory. All right, so Guitar Freaks was a game only found in Japanese arcades. You can see it here over here on the right. There's a drum game and the guitar game. Not a lot of cohesion in the titling. I think it was called Drum Mania and Guitar Freaks. I actually just played Guitar Freaks for the first time like last month in a local arcade. It's hard. The timing is really narrow. The interface looks weird. There's a few different inputs that I'm used to seeing, like open notes and stuff like that. I genuinely struggled, and not the least which because I can't tell what any of the interface or music is. I don't know what any of the songs are, and I can't navigate the interface because it's all in Japanese. That's a bit of a struggle. It's wild how rhythm arcade games are completely overtaken by Japanese games because they're the ones really making them. But like they are so unlocalized in many cases that I'm just like, this is neat. I can't tell how to pick a song or a difficulty or do any settings because I don't speak Japanese. This is also that's already a long tangent. This is the at-home version of this PowerPoint where I do long-ass tangents, apparently, because I'm in my completely different context of not worrying about wasting real people's time, but instead filling your time, which you're wasting on purpose. I'm your background noise. But yeah, Guitar Freaks was a Japanese-only arcade series, and then Guitar Hero, the series here, was created by a name that you probably don't know, which is Red Octane. They're a company that made the controllers back then. They partnered with Harmonix to bring the concept to the West. Harmonix previously made Frequency and Amplitude. That's this game in the bottom right down here. It's got a bunch of little tracks, and you could switch between the tracks to play the different instruments. It was played on the PlayStation controller where you pressed square, triangle, and circle to press the left, middle, and right buttons. And I think you press the D-pad or something to switch between the tracks. I haven't played it forever. But the little nifty thing there is that each track that you're seeing there represents a different component of the music, like the drums, the guitar, and so on. Foreshadowing is a literary device where, but like that was just a fun little thing that they had set up. Harmonix has actually had a lifelong interest in, I say that as if Harmonix is a person, in finding ways to mix music and video games in a wide variety of ways. Obviously, we know that they ended up making these guitar games, but they also were making Frequency and Amplitude before, and they also would go on to continually experiment with a bunch of weird concepts of how to mix these together. They tried to make games where you could kind of DJ or like produce music in real time. They experimented with trying to create various console-based music-making tools and ways of experimenting with music in more free form and less score-based ways. And they even made this very strange choice to, I think at one point, to make like a music-based hero shooter or MOBA, a game that I saw previews of, and I think I got a key for at one point, but never actually ended up playing while it was around, and I think it's gone already. But like they've always been trying to figure out how do we bring music to gamers and get them to interact with that in a variety of ways. So Red Octane and Harmonix partnered for making Guitar Hero, and it's immediately a big success. Guitar Hero 1 gets 2 million copies sold almost, and Guitar Hero 2 gets 5 million copies sold. It looks like this. You get this little 5-button guitar where you hold down those 5 little colors at the end of the fret, the green, red, yellow, blue, and orange. And then based on what you're holding down, you then strum the strum bar, that little black bar in the middle of the guitar, in order to input the things that you're currently pressing. And so down there, like those are chords going down the screen. So you'd want to press red and blue at the same time, then blue and orange at the same time, and strum each time, and so on. It's just classic rhythm game stuff where you're just trying to hit a certain percentage of the notes without missing or misclicking to get negative, which would give you negative score. And you're just trying to keep that rock meter green instead of red, or you'd fail the song. Immediate success, big emphasis on rock music, obviously. Did very well for itself, and so they immediately split the baby. Red Octane, and thus Guitar Hero, was bought by Activision, one of the biggest companies around. It is interesting to note that in a weird way, this almost started as kind of an indie project. I don't know how indie it is, but it's like no one knows who Red Octane and Harmonix are, really. Activision and EA were not involved. Big publishers were not involved. But once the first 2 games did so well, immediately they're like, well, we got to get this money. So Activision bought the Guitar Hero franchise from they bought all of that. They bought Red Octane, actually. And Harmonix was bought by MTV Games. So Harmonix can no longer develop Guitar Hero because they're not owned by Activision, and they're run by a different company entirely. So Activision gave Guitar Hero to Neversoft, the developers of Tony Hawk. I'm sure they've done other stuff since then too, but it was just like, that was my understanding, and that was a very weird moment of realizing that this franchise I'm playing right now just got bought by one of the most hated companies in the world and is now being developed by the Tony Hawk developers. Very weird. This is where I start becoming a hater of Guitar Hero specifically, and not necessarily rhythm games or Harmonix. That's the little twist here, I guess. Activision calls Guitar Hero 3 its largest product launch ever. Hard to verify the exact meaning of that at the time, but it is worth noting that it made $115 million in only a week. And this was a claim that was made the same year Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out, which I think to this day is like the defining entry in the Call of Duty franchise, which itself is like one of the most profitable, nightmarish franchises ever made. That year, when Guitar Hero Modern Warfare came out, Bobby Kotick, I think, from Activision said that Guitar Hero 3 is its largest product launch ever. And I believe that is because Guitar Hero 3 had its pack-in guitar controller. So while Call of Duty 4 was a monstrously successful game, and I think was the highest selling game in units sold that year, Guitar Hero 3 had like it cost you like $130 or something to buy because it had that controller that you most likely needed because it was such a successful game that you probably didn't have the guitar yet because it was like the breakthrough success. It's the difference between Demon Souls and Dark Souls as far as like everyone starting here despite it not being the beginning. It is, I think, to this day still the highest selling music game of all time. Guitar Hero 3 was where cracks were already showing for me. Neversoft made this game really weird. One of the particular things is that there was no hammer-on pull-off timing, which is that like when you play these games, there's special little white notes, and when they'll often be in a string after a non-white note. So you'll strum the first note, but then you can tap these next few notes in a row via the hammer-on and pull-off system, which is a little too much to explain. Essentially, it was a series of notes you could press by just pressing the buttons on the fret, a bit to try to simulate the way that like real guitars you can do. I mean, they're named after the actual thing on a guitar, a hammer-on or a pull-off. It's when a hammer-on is when you press a new note further down the fret that's closer to where you strum, which changes the pitch of the note. And a pull-off is where you release part of the fret while holding down a part further up the neck to pull off onto that note. And that changes like you've already strummed the string, but you're changing the pitch of the strum in real time. That's a thing you can do on a guitar, and they emulated that in the Guitar Hero games. Guitar Hero 3 made it so that there was zero timing to it. When the note came up, if you're holding the right button, it just counted, even if you were holding it way, way in advance. This led to some really strange scenarios where a hammer-on could come flying at you from off screen, and you could have been holding the key down the whole time, and it would just automatically count when it reached the bottom of the screen. So while this game did have the infamous Through the Fire and the Flames chart, which was a nightmare to look at by Dragon Force, it was unusually easy because Guitar Hero 3 actually had an extremely wide timing that made it much, much easier to succeed at notes, and honestly taught you a lot of bad habits if you were trying to be good at the other games that existed in this genre, because it was letting you get away with being really sloppy, and you'd be in for a rude awakening when you played any other entry that was around. It was fucking immediately huge. So South Park did a parody of this game a week after it came out, 10 days after it came out, which is noteworthy because South Park, to this day, as far as I could tell, has only ever done parodies of Minecraft, Pokemon, World of Warcraft, and Guitar Hero 3. That's it. They mention other games. They have jokes about other games. But as far as like doing a parody episode, it's only happened 4 times. And most of the times it already happened by now. I believe this was a year after the World of Warcraft episode. So I think they would eventually do Minecraft, and I've never seen that one. It was the most viewed episode of anything on Comedy Central in 2007. This single episode of South Park. Like, people were tuning the fuck in for the Guitar Hero episode of South Park. It sucks. It's not a very good episode. It has one funny joke, which is that because they're fake guitarists, they also get a fake heroin addiction. So they get hooked to playing a video game where you chase the dragon. But because it's South Park, they couldn't let that be subtle enough. Like, they could have just had you chasing the dragon, which is a already like drug terminology. But then he's just shooting up. That doesn't enable you to have the first person shooter joke, but the metaphor of chasing a dragon barely functions when you're also just literally shooting heroin in the game the whole time. Like, the parody is kind of barely legible at that point. One of my issues with this whole episode, besides the fact that it has a slur in the title, and yes, I know that queer is an academic term and a reclaimed slur among queer people, and I use it in videos when we talk about doing a queer reading and so on, and it's definitely valid for that to be used in that context. And it's not a slur when a random person says queer in the context of this stuff, because it is a descriptive term. It has been changing over time. It is not inherently just a slur used to disparage people, but it's a slur here. Like, they just put slur, a slur in their title. Like, that's just, it doesn't serve any other purpose. It's not even descriptive. There's no gay characters in this episode. They just were being edgy little shits and put a slur in the title of their episode in 2007, and everyone was okay with that. So that just kind of sucks. But beyond that, is my problem with South Park, and that I say this as somebody who liked it back then. Like, I liked it as a teenager and so on. But I've grown out of that, and I say grown out of it in a way that applies to almost no other things. Like, I very rarely condescend to something in a way where I say that you grow out of it. I do say that about South Park. I think you genuinely stop watching it when you mature, because it's just such a juvenile show, and not because of the crass humor, but because of what it actually represents ideologically. This show just thinks that it's lame to care about stuff. Like, that's essentially its central joke for most of its episodes, is that South Park thinks that it's just so fucking lame whenever you like something and care about it in any real way. And you're way cooler and smarter if you don't care about things. Yeah, just so cool. If you're emotionally detached from stuff in a way that lets you make fun of everything, but means you don't have a personality or friends or interests, that's actually the ideal form of a South Park viewer, is to always be emotionally distant and dismissive of anything that people care about, even stuff that's dumb. And that has been manifesting in so many toxic ways, including like the show becoming like increasingly like transphobic and just weird and upsetting and just kind of cruel towards anyone that the creators just don't personally feel an attachment to. And so it's been manifesting in increasingly gross ways there. While I was giving this presentation at Megaplex, I jokingly said that give them 5 minutes and they'll make an episode about Labubu, because I'm just like, what's the thing people care about right now? Labubu? Sure, whatever. Little toys. I don't care about Labubu, but sure, people like things. I live in a house with a One Piece fan that has a glass case full of 1 billion One Piece memorabilia things and figures and so on. And it's like, sure, whatever the fuck gives you any kind of comfort in this hell life that we're all having. Sure, I don't care about One Piece. I don't care about these figures, and I don't even like looking at them that much. But get them. Go do it. And so on that level, it's like, I don't care about Labubu, but sure, if you want a fucking Labubu, who gives a shit? But I'm like, South Park is exactly the kind of show that would dedicate an entire episode probably to making fun of Labubu. And the entire thing is like, oh, people care about it too much. What if the joke was they care about it so much they go crazy in some way? Like, that's always the thing, is that they take a thing that people care about and make it like a mania of some sort. I was then DM'd a few days later by people that saw that, because South Park made a Labubu episode right after I said that. I had their number so fucking on point that I predicted their Labubu episode like 4 days before it came out. So they were working on it while I was calling them out. It's extremely funny to me. You're not evil if you watch South Park. This is a bit of a longer rant than I meant for it to be, but I'm just like, it is a lame show. Like, just, they have, the creators' brains are embarrassing. They just have an embarrassing outlook to the world, and dwelling in that place for decades the way they have kind of makes them just trash people, like just the lamest people to always be there emotionally. It's just so dumb. And a lot of their humor just really falls flat when you're like, oh, people care about things, that's dumb, and realize that's what they're going to do every week. Anyway, speaking of caring about things, Rock Band came out the same year as Guitar Hero 3, and that's because Harmonix, the developers of Guitar Hero, went on to just do it again, but better. So we got a cleaner interface, we got more instruments, we got a really cool art style out of this. Rock Band immediately, this is my inability to filter information out that isn't relevant, but I'm like, there's a Rock Band shirt in Scott Pilgrim. He's wearing the bass player shirt from Rock Band's icons in Scott Pilgrim, and I noticed that. No one else did, but I cared too much about Rock Band at the time, and I cared about Scott Pilgrim too much at the time. So I was like, oh my god. They went on to make Rock Band, and they immediately improved upon and evolved what they were doing here. So Guitar Hero 3 was just Guitar Hero 2, but again, it's Guitar Hero, but Activision gets to make the money this time. But when Harmonix partnered with MTV Games and EA to make Rock Band, they didn't just make Guitar Hero again. They immediately set themselves apart by iterating on this stuff and growing this thing. So it went from being a largely solo game where people mostly just played guitar on their own all the time in Guitar Hero, and maybe sometimes you had a player or two that got to play bass, which most people saw as lamer because the tracks weren't as interesting. Here you had a guitarist, a bass player, a drum player, and a singer all in one room, all working together at something. And it was a pretty cool experience because of the fact like you had this like, in both these games, you have star power or overdrive. You build up a meter from hitting certain note sequences that come up sometimes, and you can spend that when you choose to. In Guitar Hero, it just gave you a ×2 multiplier, and it could give you a bit more meter as far as like the one that determines your health bar. If you need to bail yourself out a little bit, you could use it on harder parts of the song. So there was a little bit of risk reward that was already interestingly built in there, where you could either use it during good parts of the song in order to get a multiplier to get a higher score, or you could use it during hard parts of the song to make it so you could succeed when you were failing. So it was an interesting thing where it was both a bailout mechanic for casual players that would help them when they were really stuck, but then as you got better, it became a thing that you specifically saved, not to heal yourself, but to make yourself stronger, and essentially get a much higher score at the end of the song, and it was a reward for getting good at the games. Here, it's turned into a cooperative thing where all 4 of you are working together, and you can either, once again, use your overdrive in this case to bail out players that you see struggling on the screen during difficult segments and actually have this like co-op experience when you're like doing your little party game. Or if you're taking it more seriously, you would all be storing up your overdrive, planning which parts of the song you want to all use it during, and then syncing up your use of the overdrive so that instead of getting a ×2 multiplier, you get a ×8 multiplier for like a crazy score, and you try to go for that gold star. I was a part of an online band that specifically like was working on trying to gold star all the songs as best we could and so on. Like that was a whole different dynamic of playing these games cooperatively and coordinating and having it be a social experience. So immediately, Harmonix took this whole thing in an interesting direction. And this is why we hate Guitar Hero now. Guitar Hero, instead of having any new ideas, just responded by immediately taking the exact ideas that once again, I'll remind you, creators of this like little boom last did. They just took the band from Rock Band and just put it in their game. They're like, oh, what if we did that too? This is basically the last innovation Guitar Hero will ever have, was them just nabbing Rock Band's idea after having already inherited the entire franchise also from Harmonix. Like I cannot stress enough how Activision is just a black hole of creativity, and they almost never bring anything to the table. They do just bike things and milk them in a way that corporations always do, and that's just a bummer. That's just a bummer. But yeah, this is my inherent bias of this entire presentation. Immediately, Guitar Hero saturates the fuck out of the market. Guitar Hero 1 came out in 2005, Guitar Hero 2 in 2006, and 3, and so on. But specifically in 2009, the year after Guitar Hero World Tour came out, they put out Guitar Hero On Tour Modern Hits, Metallica, Smash Hits, 5, DJ Hero, Band Hero, and Van Halen in 1 year. They put out 7 Guitar Hero games in 1 year. That's less than 60 days between releases on average. Like, what the fuck are we doing? Admittedly, it's because like these are glorified song packs. Like you put some different visuals here and there in them, and you just say fuck it, and you just put the games out as quickly as possible. And you just try to sell packs of songs again and again for $60 to get as much money as you can from this glut. But as you can tell from how that timeline ends the next year, it pretty much killed the franchise. I can't stress enough about how soulless this seemed to get. I was playing all of these games because I was trying to get the achievements as them, and I was hooked to rhythm games in general. So I was just trying to give it a go. But I particularly I had a GameFly subscription at the time, so I would rent each one of these games, and then I would try to 100% the entirety of the game over the span of a single rental, and then send it back. And that was my approach to burning through each of these. It's wild seeing how they had like art design at the beginning, like. You had little guys posing, and they had like a particular vibe to them, and it kind of peaked up here, and then they become silhouettes, and then it's just logos. Like they genuinely didn't even care about like they didn't even care, but like they stopped even putting a guy on the cover or doing much in the form of art. They genuinely just paid a logo designer to make a logo for each game, and that's the entire cover, which is extremely weird to me because Guitar Hero, Metallica, and Van Halen, you're like, these are real life celebrities and you're trying to sell this game on their star power, and you just put a logo on. You didn't evoke the imagery of any of their particular albums, as far as I can tell. You didn't put the people on the cover. Seemingly, to me, it almost feels like because they didn't have time to get the art together or something, is how quickly these are put together. I don't know. But it's just, it's wild to me that like obviously here, like you put Steven Tyler on the cover because it's Aerosmith, right? What are these fucking lines? It's just a bunch of lines. It's so weird to me that half of the Guitar Hero franchise doesn't even have cover art, basically. It's just logos. So strange to me. But yeah, they immediately just milked this entire genre as rapidly as they could via just flooding the shelves. And they were rewarded for it. They made so much money. And immediately a billion clones came out. So we have freaking Pop Star Guitar, Rock Revolution. I've played that game. It's miserable. Power Gig, Rise of the Sixth String. I found a Santa Claus Guitar Hero clone over here on the right that has a Bara furry on it. So enjoy somewhat nightmarish Bara Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer just staring you down, soullessly floating in the background as you play this guitar track. And then we had Rock of the Dead. This is a fun nonsense piece of trivia, but there is a game that is done in the style of the Typing of the Dead, which itself was a, oh God, I have to explain this one from scratch, don't I? We all know House of the Dead, right? It's the light gun shooters where you shoot zombies. House of the Dead 2 specifically had a spin-off made for the Dreamcast, I think, called Typing of the Dead. That was a game where you, instead of shooting with the light gun, you had to type words. There'd be a word floating in front of each zombie, and you had to type that word into the keyboard as best you could, as fast as you could, in order to shoot each zombie in time. And like smaller enemies just had an individual letter, and boss fights had like phrases and sentences and stuff that you had to type. It was like you just had to, it was a crazy, like weird edutainment shooter thing that got you better at touch typing, but also like was a weird skill to work on for that. So Rock of the Dead applied that idea to Guitar Hero, and they took if you take any of the existing guitar peripherals you had from the other games and use them to play this zombie shooter where you had to play specific note strings in order to fight each one. These were not timed. These didn't really have a timing based thing. You just click them as fast as you could, like in Typing the Dead. But then every time a boss fight came up, a genuine song would start and you would play Guitar Hero to beat the boss, essentially. In this case, it would be a Rob Zombie track. In fact, the entire soundtrack of noteworthy music was Rob Zombie. So you had a Rob Zombie soundtrack, which means I can't play this on YouTube because it's got an actual rock music in it. And particularly, so fresh off of Dr. Horrible Sing-Along blog, the Player 1 and Player 2 were voice acted by Neil Patrick Harris and Felicia Day. Bizarre. I think it was only like a $20 game too, sold on discs. And it's just like genuinely somewhat inspired little piece of strange star-studded shovelware. Very funny game. I definitely have played it. I've played Rock Revolution. Some of these I've never even heard of. That just came up over the course of like looking around for this game. Wild projects. This here is a slide where I just wanted to highlight the lack of inspiration going on the Activision end of things, and how easy it was as a Rock Band fan to hate Guitar Hero as a franchise. Because what the fuck is this, Activision? So Rock Band partnered with Lego to make Lego Rock Band. And I'm not going to say this is the peak of all art or anything like that, but it was genuinely like, oh, look, they tried. Look at them go. They took the little Lego dudes and they made a game where you play as little Lego men playing Rock Band. And like they actually had entirely different characters and sets. And like they had like artist cameos, like Freddie Mercury you see there, like made in Lego form. And like they did custom music videos. So like you play like Tick Tick Boom by the Hives, and the gimmick is that the little Lego men are trying to demolish a condemned building, but oh no, they hit it with their wrecking ball and the wrecking ball broke. It's such a strong building for some reason. The only way we can defeat this building is through the power of rock. And so you play a rock song about that is nominally about bombs to demolish this building, and they sync up explosions in the music video that make progress towards breaking the building down with each time that the Hives say tick tick boom. It's just they're giving it a go. They're making a genuine kids game here out of the Rock Band franchise while partnering with Lego. It makes sense. And yes, the entire soundtrack was child-friendly music and so on. Like they had like We Are the Champions by Queen. It just had like friendly, kid-friendly music. And if you didn't like the Lego aesthetic, but you did want the music, you could just buy this game and you could export the songs into your Rock Band library and just go play those songs in Rock Band 2 and 3 without it really having to bother with Lego Rock Band at all. You could just take the songs out of it as a DLC pack if you just wanted it for that, without having to play like a kids game. Activision, having no creative ideas, put out Band Hero on the same day, and there's just so much to unpack here. So Band Hero nominally has a kid-friendly soundtrack, except it has songs about drugs and sex that are just censored. So they kind of failed at the assignment because they couldn't choose between picking popular music and picking kid-friendly music. They ended up just kind of landing on having somewhat more poppy music as their thing. It's called Band Hero. I'll remind you that Guitar Hero already added bands in Guitar Hero World Tour. So they've already had, let's go look at the slide. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is their 5th band-based guitar game already. This is the 5th one. So they didn't add bands in this thing. You could already play as a band. This is the 5th game that they'd released within a year where you could play as a band. So what does Band Hero mean? It's not an offshoot of Guitar Hero. It's not changing the mechanics of Guitar Hero. It's also just like a shitty name. What the fuck is Band Hero? Why would you call it Band Hero? That name doesn't make sense. It's not exciting. It's not interesting. And Guitar Hero is the bankable name you're selling on. Did you think that the Guitar Hero brand, the most famous music game series of all time, was holding you back and you need to make a more pop culture friendly name than the most popular thing you've ever had? I don't know what they were doing. I genuinely cannot comprehend what Band Hero was, and I've played it. But it came out, and this is why it feels so spiteful and why it's so easy to hate this goddamn franchise. It came out the same day as Lego Rock Band. Like, what a weird little dick move to be like, oh yeah, you have a kind of pop music kid-friendly game? We're going to make our own and release it the exact same day. And it'll just be like now that's what I call music version of your game or something. Like, it genuinely feels like the way that Asylum puts out like Transmorphers to capitalize on the fame of Transformers in order to try to trick grandmas into buying the wrong DVD at the store. Except it's coming from the more popular franchise, so I don't know what's happening. Activision, I think, might just be dicks. Like, I don't know why else this would happen. It's such a strange thing. Anyway, here's the difference between the band-centric games that came out. So I talked about Metallica a bit ago, but yeah, like Guitar Hero had Guitar Hero, Aerosmith, Metallica, and Van Halen. Over here we have some screenshots from Guitar Hero Van Halen. Some inspired art choice. It is what you remember Xbox 360 games looking like. It's just real rough looking. And they were rushing these out, so the art design was just kind of whatever they could manage in time. Meanwhile, this is just me being the biggest fanboy ever here, but I'm just like, I can't unsee the difference here where Rock Band had Rock Band Beatles is Beatles Rock Band and Green Day Rock Band. And yeah, that's the Beatles. That's a coherent art style that has aged well. They've altered the art style of the tracks and the interface to match the style of the band that they're adapting. The entire background and everything, like they have custom music videos going through all the eras of that band. It all looks fucking fantastic. It was a visually really cool thing to play at the time. And down there, Green Day Rock Band was less imaginatively crazy because they're just a more mundane band. But that's Green Day. That's that's a cartoonish, stylized interpretation for the 360 era of the members of Green Day in a way that's creatable by a smaller company trying to get things out and so on. And it just looked really cool and played really well. And that just feels like this is me splitting the hairs the most between these franchises. But I'm just like, even when they both just did the same idea of like, what if like the whole game was one band? They just did it better in one direction than the other. I also can't help but notice that like this is a matter of taste, but like the Guitar Hero games had a bunch of other bands on them, despite being about that one band. And the Rock Band ones, you got the band you wanted on the cover. Like if you wanted Beatles, you got Beatles. The entire game was Beatles from front to back, and it had additional like albums over time via Future for Support coming out that were just even more Beatles albums. And then Green Day had Green Day plus more Green Day plus more Green Day. If you liked Van Halen that much, which I don't know who does, but if you did like Van Halen enough to buy a game for them, you had to put up with there being 20 other bands on the same game that weren't Van Halen, which I guess they wanted for variety, but it meant you got less Van Halen, so there's less bang for your buck there. And in a universe where both franchises already have a bunch of DLC, so you don't really need the variety just for the sake of it. So you're just getting less of the band that you supposedly wanted in the end. Ultimately, the whole thing ended in only 5 years. Guitar Hero came out in 2005. Both franchises put out their last entry, asterisk, in 2010. They both stopped here, and Guitar Hero had a franchise in those 5 years had made $2 billion. Rock Band made $1 billion. It's not bad. And yeah, just looking at the art style here, I'm a dick. But like, look at this. It's just a fucking logo. And then Rock Band had their coolest albums. That's an album. Their coolest cover so far, honestly. And just like, and they added a thingy. But we'll get to that. So Guitar Hero Warriors of Rock, I played it. It was one of my favorite Guitar Heroes. It's still just Guitar Hero. They had made basically no changes still after making like 15 games or 20 games or some nonsense like that. Very disappointing that how little they iterated, but it did feel the best to play. The interface was a bit better. The soundtrack was all right. Like, I think I got the platinum trophy for this game. I fully committed, but it just was not noteworthy. It was another game in an endless series of games. There was no sense that this was the capstone entry in the franchise. It just dropped off the face of the earth after this because somewhere the graph just like went below a line, and they're like, oh, I guess we'll stop making these. And then Activision just stopped out of nowhere. It was wild. Rock Band, on the other hand, went out with a fucking bang. They added a 2-octave keyboard. I don't know if everyone remembers this. They added a keyboard. I have this still, and it was under my bed all these years. But you could play as a little, you can just barely see it, but there's 5 little buttons here: green, red, yellow, blue, orange. So if you're being a little coward about it, you can play a 5-note track on it, just like traditional Guitar Hero games where you just play these 5 keys and just play around with that. But the real goal here was to go into pro mode, where they hit you with an entire fucking keyboard here on the screen, and you had to play the actual correct notes by just being able to read it on the fly. And this is a funny bit of their scope outreaching their what they could deal with a little bit. You might have noticed that this is not big enough. It's color coded, so you can tell where on the keyboard you are. So this is yellow through green, and so it's this part of the keyboard through this part of the keyboard. That leaves off red and orange. So this couldn't fit the entire keyboard on it because they were constrained to the space that was already dedicated to how they were already presenting the drums and guitar and so on. So periodically you would just get arrows on the screen that pointed left or right, and it was warning you that the keyboard was about to shift. And this screen would just scroll over to the red part or to the orange part, and so you could tell where the hell you were on the keyboard. It's very goofy, but they did genuinely do the note charts for the authentic keyboard or piano for all these different songs. Rock Band 3 also had a shift in its soundtrack style, and that it incorporated a ton of songs from an era of rock music that incorporated a lot of keyboard and piano. So it also had a sound shift that was fun to engage with. And that was all neat. And you could either play it as a keytar by actually holding it like the Rock Band guitar or the Guitar Hero guitar with a strap and everything. And you'd hold it with your left hand like this and then try to play the chords with your right hand right here. Or you could set up on a little stand and play it like a proper sit-down piano. Immediately insane thing. Also, this instrument kind of spawned my job. This is too many tangents. This is I promised the presentation was over in like 10 minutes or less when I was live, but I'm in a YouTube video, so I can just ramble forever and waste your time. But this peripherals existence kind of is why I'm talking to you right now. This is just some fun lore behind the scenes. I went to the midnight premiere, the midnight release at GameStop for Rock Band 3 to get the keyboard bundle. Because you get the full band, but I already had the full band. So I was just buying the disc and keyboard bundle that they also had. And next in line with me was Andrew, who I would go on to record YouTube videos with. We did a few little podcasty experimental things, and then had the idea to record gaming content and created a channel called The Sad Games. And then after me getting like kind of invested in doing that for like 2 years, he was moving out of town, and I was at that point, like I had sunk cost where I was like, no, I've been doing this do I want to give this up? And it's funny because we had no audience. There was no reason for me to commit to it back then. But I did then commit to, I didn't want to give up Let's Playing at the time when he was moving, so I started doing a solo channel, and that's the one that you probably know me from if you don't know me from my video essays separately. If you've been watching my gaming content, there's a string of causality that comes from Rock Band adding this instrument to the game, which is very funny, especially since like I did not go to midnight releases. My only midnight releases ever, I think, were for for Rock Band 3 and for Halo 3. Or maybe Halo 2, and that was it ever. Like I just did not do these things. So the level of coincidence here is very funny. So I basically met Andrew because I wanted this instrument, and then got this job because of this dumb instrument, and I still have it. Very hard to play. I can't do it. They also had 3-part harmonies. Technically, this was a Beatles Rock Band feature, but like this was the ways they were iterating and experimenting as they went forward. So while Guitar Hero was just miming harmonics, and by miming I mean they were just recreating Rock Band 1 and leaving it there, Harmonix kept going forward with their sequels. They added 3-part harmonies here where you could hook up 3 microphones to the same game and have 3 people singing at once, and you could recreate the harmonies of these. They did this for Beatles Rock Band in particular because that game's so famous for its harmonies. That band is so famous for its harmonies amongst its band members, and you could sing them together and do all the different parts at once. But they incorporated that as a feature as in the franchise as a whole, and it was just a wild thing to figure out how to do. And also finally an answer about what to do in some of these songs where you were confused, because singing solo before the harmonies were added, it was genuinely a trip trying to figure out which parts they were going to chart and which parts you were supposed to sing, because some songs have such complicated vocals that you're like, which part is me? Which part am I doing? Am I doing the part that I'm hearing, or am I doing the part that specific person's doing? They added drum cymbals. So they specifically added these little cymbals on top of the instrument that you could then do alternate notes on. Down here on the track, you can see there's a circular note that represents a cymbal instead of the square note that represents the track. That let them reuse the colors, so they could pretty elegantly put a yellow cymbal over the yellow drum, and orange, blue over blue, green over green. And so they could use the same 4-note track for the drums without having to fuck with the complexity of that, and just make the notes circular to represent the cymbals, and have that be the way that they fit that device into the existing thing. You could buy these plastic cymbals to add to your existing drum kit as an expansion, Or you could play with a real any kind of MIDI drum kit that you already owned. They sold, I believe, an officially branded Rock Band Pro drum kit that was like their like sort of like partnered electronic drum set that was proven to work with the game. But you could calibrate basically any electronic drum set, as far as I know, to work with the game, which is why this guy's got this crazy fucking kit that he must have been already using in his life. And he just hooked it up to Rock Band 3 as an instrument and just got to use it. It was just compatible with real instruments. They made a music game that got so complicated, it worked with real instruments. And that's just like a very fun, weird concept. It also turned out that this drummer in the background here, he needed to know, because they wanted him to look authentic. So he needed to know what cymbals to hit, even when the game itself didn't have cymbals. So all along, all of these games already had cymbal data in them. So when they came out with the Rock Band 3 cymbals, it turned out that all of your old songs from Rock Band 1 and 2 that you exported from those discs, and Lego Rock Band, and all the DLC you've bought over the years, was all already compatible with this Pro Drums mode. Like, this new instrument had 1,000+ songs of backlogged compatible music, even though it just came out, because they had been thoughtful enough to program this data into the songs in advance, never knowing whether or not they'd actually get to ever act on it. And so you got this crazy value for having these dumb little symbols added to your silly little drum kit. I still have all of this. I still have this entire drum kit and all of its dumb symbols. I've never given them up. And then they added a real guitar. This was cursed. This was a brilliantly cursed, upsetting idea. This is me using the real guitar, which I bought in my fucking ancient room with my tiny TV and my Game Informer poster up here from like the 100th or 200th issue or whatever, and nonsense like that. And my Beatles hat on my fan, because I went to the Beatles Love Cirque du Soleil thing in Vegas and got that hat. It's just nonsense. This is too much lore. So they made it so that you could get if you could get like I think this required a MIDI out, but there was an adapter you could use to try to get your your real life guitar to work with Rock Band 3, and then you would try to play the music and it would interpret the notes. You had to make sure your guitar was tuned correctly. They just throw chords and notes at you. It's just, here are the 6 strings right here, and these numbers are on the strings to indicate that's the fret you need to be holding in order to play the note, which is straightforward here, but over here you get chords, so you need to press the right number on 2 different frets and just actually play stems in real time, which is obviously really hard. So you got to work your way up the difficulties very slowly and genuinely learn the song. They have like the special notation where the chord flexes up and down to kind of make a shape that can try to communicate the shape of the chord and so on. Insane project. I genuinely tried to learn guitar for a bit via this. Is extremely hard, but it was a wild innovation thing to get pushed forward through. But not everyone wants to buy a special guitar for this thing that has like heavy electronics in it, which I did buy. The problem was I worked at Best Buy at the time, so I kept looking at it every day, and I couldn't help but just go home with it one day because I was working in the gaming department when this came out. So it's really hard to resist the idea of buying it at some point. But not everyone wants to buy this nightmare controller, so they made an even more nightmare controller that's cheaper. The button one. The one with buttons. There is an individual button for every fret string combination. And then you have to strum the correct string here with an actual guitar pick while holding the correct combination of physical buttons. And you can play that. This is cheaper, obviously, because it's not a real guitar. It's also maybe more precise of a way to play this mode. Like, it's fun. The novelty of playing a real guitar in Rock Band is fun. But if you genuinely just like, I want the inputs to just work in like a I hate Wii kind of way, which is relatable. Here's just real objective buttons you can actually press to play this mode in a more abstracted, less useful, but still real-ish kind of way. And maybe you could translate some of that over into playing the real songs with some practice. You're at least having to make the fret shapes, but This is an abomination unto man. This shouldn't exist. This is one of the most nightmarish peripherals ever made for any video game. This is up there with that insane Steel Battalion guitar controller, not guitar. I keep saying guitar today. It's like that nightmarish Steel Battalion controller that cost hundreds of dollars and was the only way to play Steel Battalion 1. I have one. I still have one to this day. Of course I do. They also added Rock Band Network, or had that ongoing at this point. There's Felicia Day #2. With this, they tapped into a thing on Xbox Live called Xbox Live Indie Games, which is not the same thing as Xbox Live Arcade. It was a way that people could submit their own games to Xbox Live, and there was a process through which you could review your games. People could review the games as peers to verify whether or not it was safe to go onto Xbox Live and so on, and then it would go on and people would just buy it. So you could sell your own games on Xbox Live if it was made through this particular tool, which is a wild little concept that happened at the time. Also kind of how I came here, by the way, is that me and Andrew's early videos were us playing Xbox Live Arcade games demos and just kind of marveling at how bad most of them were. Rock Band hooked into this framework in the back end of Xbox Live to make Rock Band Network happen, and made it so that people on the Xbox platform could, if they had the rights to the songs, they could learn how to chart their own music, and they could individually chart all of the music to have all of these instrument tracks. They had to manually track every note for every song on every instrument, but also make the 4 difficulties, easy, medium, hard, and expert, for every instrument. And then eventually, when they added Pro mode, they could add the Pro difficulties and the keyboard and the harmonies. They could do all of that work to get their song into the game and then sell it. And then they would actually make the profits off of the music that they put on Rock Band Network. Like it was an open platform in that kind of way. A lot of meme music was on there. So we had Amazing Horse by Weeble. We had Do I Want to Date Your Avatar by The Guild. Do I Want to... Was that the same? I think that was it. And then, of course, Lemon Demons, The Ultimate Showdown was on there. There's a lot of that. In fact, like Amazing Horse had a extended cut, because that's like a 30-second joke animation or something, and they expanded it out into being like a 2 or 3 minute song. So there's like an extended cut of Amazing Horse in Rock Band Network, and a fair number of songs got that weird treatment. There's a lot of weird trivia I could fit in here about fucking Rock Band's nonsense. Like, they put Snoop Dogg in Rock Band, who obviously doesn't have the instruments you need. So they did electric guitar reorchestrations of Snoop Dogg tracks to add a band. So they did rock rap, not covers, because Snoop Dogg's like vocals and stuff were still there, but they did like rock rap variations of Snoop Dogg's songs to make them compatible with Rock Band, to put them in Rock Band. There's like weird Rock Band exclusive versions of songs throughout Rock Band because of that. Just like the desire to put stuff on the format, and the constraints that were involved, where not everything would fit. There was also just weird things that just broke the format. You're like, fuck it, this is a piano only track. I'm just gonna put this really cool piano track on here. You can buy it if you have piano. If you don't play the keyboard peripheral, don't buy this one. It doesn't have any other instruments. But yeah, at this point, the guitar craze died. There's no more after Rock Band 3 and Guitar Hero Warriors of Rock. They each put out one game in 2010, and then they moved on. Harmonix had their own side gig that they moved on to, which is that the Kinect was happening on the Xbox, and they made a dancing game specifically for that. So they're iterating on the like Ubisoft dance games, but those were about like just waving a Wiimote in a specific gesture, and the rest of the dance was kind of fake. In this case, the Kinect could track your entire body. So in Dance Central's case, you did genuinely do the moves as they went. And I actually put a fair amount of time into this game. It was exhausting. But a really creative thing they put in here, besides just the part where they could track your moves more authentically and have you actually do the full dance and care about your whole posture and everything, was that they had a dynamic difficulty system that was a really creative way of going forward with music games. Up until now, you've always had to just pick a difficulty and just stick with it. Most Japanese arcade games still do this. Dance Dance Revolution does this. I played a a really weird DJ-ish game last month, and that one still had the set difficulties. Guitar Hero and Rock Band had set difficulties. You just had to pick the one difficulty and play the one chart. In Dance Central, you would start playing a song, and it would just test you on whether or not you nail the individual movements. It would start you on the vague facsimile of easy mode, and it would automatically adapt the difficulty, more like a Resident Evil game instead of a music game, based on how well you perform each individual move. Like if you're nailing a certain move, it would upgrade the difficulty of that move to a more accurate version of the full choreography. And it wouldn't even necessarily wait until you finish the song. It would just upgrade the difficulty in real time. So that same part of the song might come out later, because songs repeat themselves, and it would just have a different thing for you to do now, and it'd be like challenging you continuously. So it's very engaging. And also, I think it had like an invisible skill rating in the background it was keeping track of, where it would start you at somewhat higher starting points as you played future songs. If you were just doing better in general, it wouldn't bother starting you on the easiest difficulty anymore. It would like start you in a more intermediate level and just dynamically change that over time. Just genuinely cool little ways of approaching difficulty and figuring out how to get the desired impact of these games, which is that everybody just wants to play the music game and they want to get better at it, but they don't want to like have to guess constantly about what difficulty to play and so on. Like we've all played, not all, I mean, we haven't all played DDR, but many of us have played a DDR type game and been like, I want to play this song, but the medium difficulty is so tediously easy and the hard difficulty is absurd. Why is there a 5 feet gap, because they measure the difficulty in feet, between these two difficulties? Well, what if I wanted this song but 7 difficulty? Well, Dance Central actually did that, which is kind of wild. Rock Band also kept trying to do a frequency game, which was just funny to me. This is just pointless trivia at this point, but I'm just like, they made a frequency and amplitude back in the day, those ones where each track represented a different instrument, but it was a single player game. They made 2 attempts to turn Rock Band back into frequency. They had a PSP game over here, Rock Band Unplugged, where they just very much directly adapted the interface and visuals of Rock Band, but tried to make it a thing where you could switch instruments on the fly and play more or less the same track. This was a bit of a rougher idea because they tried to just brute force Rock Band directly into a different format and just try to figure out what buttons you would press to play it. It was messy. It was a rough one. Rock Band Blitz, on the other hand, was a recreation of that, like the way that you would just like drum to a song for fun when it's just like in your head and so on with your 2 hands. It created that feeling on an Xbox controller. There's a few button variations, but I specifically did the one where you press left and right bumper to play the 2 notes, because that recreated the feeling of just like drumming away at something. And you would just key between the 4 or 5 instruments that a song had and just tap the left and right things while hopping between the different tracks. And there's a bunch of different power-ups and builds and nonsense things you could do that were all kind of like adding to the arcadey vibe of that. Very interesting little thing. Your goal was to keep the multiplier up on each instrument, and they were constrained to each other. So you want to get the highest multiplier possible, and you want to keep going up this track, but whatever was the lowest one was holding you back. So you had to go over there and like here, there's the drum icon. If starting here, if you play this phrase perfectly, this thing will go up by one multiplier rank. So that was your incentive to evenly swap between the instruments as much as possible to keep them moving upward. And it just led to a very specific like macro approach to rhythm gaming, where instead of being about nailing every single note of a specific track, you were floating amongst all the instruments and trying to make long-term decisions about how to best optimize the song across all these charts. So it was a very different way of engaging with the music. And saying different way is noteworthy here because it was compatible with your entire DLC catalog. So you could play every song you'd ever bought for Rock Band in this game for free. And the game itself was only $10. So you bought a silly little arcade game on Xbox for $10, and it was compatible with all the music you'd been buying so far at no additional cost. And you could just re-experience all these songs in a different context. And it was just like a very fun little game to tap away around. And I topped a lot of leaderboards in this game because frankly, it was easier than trying to learn the actual drum kit. But I could play expert vocals, expert guitar, expert drums, and expert bass in normal Rock Band. And I could not handle the keyboard. And also, to be honest, I couldn't clear everything on expert guitar, expert drums, but I was getting there overall. Here's a weird little side tangent in the industry that happened at one point, which is that so Ubisoft took two of Harmonix's ideas and combined them here, and the effect was pretty interesting. They made Rocksmith, which is a real guitar game, once again, but unlike Rock Band 3, which had to fit it into the existing co-op structure, they made a guitar-only game for this, so you did just have a whole dedicated interface for explaining what you were trying to do. And as you can see here, it is clearer. It is like no shocker when you have a dedicated game just to this one thing. You can communicate what you're trying to accomplish a bit better than you could when you're bolting a billion mechanics onto Rock Band. The second, less obvious thing that it incorporated, in addition to the real guitar element, was the part where they actually ended up using Dance Central's dynamic difficulty system. On the top of the screen here, you can see a bunch of meters that are filling up, these purple squares. Going left to right, those meters, the song progresses left to right along that track, and the meters, how purple they are, shows you how full the difficulty is, basically. So if you wanted to learn a song in Rocksmith, you just hop into it, and they just start hitting you with like these low-level, much simpler approximations of the song to try to like ease you in over time. And then as you nailed each segment, it would increase the difficulty of that phrase so that when you played the song again, you'd get hit with a more authentic variation until eventually you are finally playing the actual full chords of the song, and you're playing the correct number of notes and instead of a more sparse set of notes and so on. So they use the same dynamic difficulty system from Dance Central, and so they kind of mash those ideas together. Rocksmith, I think Rocksmith 1 and 2, or Rocksmith and Rocksmith 2014, the sequel is called, I think they were pretty well received. They did try to bring Rocksmith back like last year, and it is overwhelmingly negative on Steam. They tried to turn the most recent version of it into some kind of live service, and it was not well liked. So I don't know. And this is actually the coolest thing that came out of the Activision half of this, is that DJ Hero was a weird spinoff of Guitar Hero that was actually genuinely interesting. They had this whole dedicated DJ deck here as a controller, which had a crossfader and a volume dial, and it had the whole record right there where you could hold down different parts of the record to scratch it and so on. Well, and the record spun. And as a result, you got this like insane track you see on the bottom of the screen here, where those green bits, you're supposed to be scratching the record while holding down the correct color, in that case, green. They wanted you to crossfade back and forth based on that blue track there, which is that with that like that what do you call it? That switch on the bottom left of the controller. That's its function there. And then I think they wanted you to be pressing, I don't remember if it was the button on the far left or if it was the red button actually, in order to press those red notes there. But there was just a lot going on at once. Just a completely different approach compared to the main stuff that we were seeing at the time. And in particular, it was all about mashups. So it was about mixing a specific song by one band with a specific song by another band, which is why you see in that bottom there, it says like Jay-Z and Eminem, The Killers and Rihanna, and so on. They were doing mashups, but they specifically had the functionality to customize and freestyle the mashups a bit. So it wasn't just about an pre-existing mix being the only way of doing it. There was like the ability to fuck around and play around with it and kind of experience some freedom there. But just genuinely a weird little fun thing that was genuinely different from what we were getting otherwise. And I do still have not one, but two of these controllers. I can play multiplayer DJ Hero in 2025 and no one can stop me. 5 years later, this happened. This was genuinely weird. So we had nonstop music games for 5 years, and then boom, gone all at once. Then an entire generation later, 5 years later, both franchises came back. And like, at this point, it just feels spiteful. I think at this point, Dance Central was ramping down. At some point, it became clear that Xbox was not going to continue with the Kinect. So Harmonix was kind of fucked from that perspective. They made an attempt to bring Rock Band back. This was not a very impressive entry in the Rock Band series. It was just a return to form, probably testing the waters for the idea of returning to what they were doing back in the day. But this version of Rock Band didn't really bring any new features to the table. And in fact, it even was missing some features. There was no head-to-head mode where you could play against another person on split screen with a guitar, like, and versus each other. There was no keyboard. It was just gone. They just didn't bother supporting it. I imagine that was a limitation of the idea that they couldn't get, for the scale of the return, they didn't think that they could ship keyboards again as plastic instruments and sell them again. But I would have liked them to see them support the functionality, even if they didn't have new keyboards to sell people. Guitar Hero, on the other hand, they did change things up. They added a new 3-fret 2-string guitar. So you had 3 notes left to right, and each one was either a white note or a black note, and those are the 2 separate rows. So they're trying to add that separate string element to Guitar Hero for the first time. But to be completely cynical here, which is not really a change of course here for having treating Guitar Hero, it just comes across as bizarrely spiteful to be like, Rock Band's trying to make another music game. We'll match their release date. It's 5 years later. They had so much open space to experiment with the idea of bringing Guitar Hero back. It comes back within 2 weeks of Rock Band 4. Like, that's bizarre. I can't help but wonder if it was rushed out on some level because like the background video was all just like live action music videos instead of having the 3D visuals. So it feels like they were finding a way to very quickly film stuff instead of having to make the usual like assets and all that. And I also can't help but think back to Activision saying that Guitar Hero 3 was their biggest product launch ever at the time and think, oh, right. It outperformed Call of Duty because it sold plastic instruments on an insane scale. And they probably never could do that again once everyone had the World Tour band set. There was probably diminishing returns on them selling so many Guitar Hero games because they couldn't sell the plastic instruments with each game in the same way. So them bringing back their stuff and being like, well, you can play the new Guitar Hero, but you do have to buy a new guitar because we changed the whole game to be incompatible with the previous playstyle. So 100% of people playing Guitar Hero Live have to buy a new instrument. That feels a bit calculated. Whereas Rock Band was compatible with all your previous instruments, and if you had made a generational hop, most likely, between for the Xbox 360 and the Xbox One, for example, they had an adapter you could get that would make all of your old stuff work. So you could still keep your old instruments, and they didn't force you to buy the new Rock Band instruments, even though that probably would have been more profitable. Just a different approach that I can't unsee. But I believe that this was a return to being indie-ish, in that MTV Games no longer exists, and I believe that Rock Band 4 was made independent of EA. So at this point, this really was, I think, basically an indie studio bringing back a property they technically still could do, versus Guitar Hero being Activision and using all that power to seemingly blot them out by insisting on making their game come out at the same time, even though there was a 5-year gap that was totally free. But this is my biased interpretation of history, of course. Anyway, nowadays, both franchises are dead again. Neither of them had a new sequel after those ones. Dance Central also died. And Harmonix was purchased by Epic Games. So when Epic Games is doing all of those live concerts, like the Marshmallow concert, and doing all these interactive music experiences and so on, Harmonix is often working on those projects. And that's a bummer. I don't like Epic. I don't like Fortnite. I don't like that it's all about having a billion FOMO store mechanics and trying to get people to buy the ability to express themselves in order to socially fit in as young people in many cases, but that's expressed better via Dan Olson's video, Folding Ideas' video about Fortnite. But that's all a bummer. And then after they were acquired, Fortnite Festival was released a couple years ago, and it's just nakedly Rock Band, but in Fortnite. So now you can play Gangnam Style as Wendell, I guess. So that's a thing that's happening now. It looks rough. They are selling instruments for it on Epic's store, so you can actually once again buy plastic instruments once again for these new things, but it just seems kind of lame. I've looked at it a bit, and it's just kind of a bummer compared to what I liked playing before. And playing as Wendell will not fix it. So the moral at the end of the day here is that there are no happy endings in the games industry. Probably don't get a video game developer job. It seems to be just a way to get fired every few years and have everything you ever make that's successful get acquired, and then you get fired. Just a bummer. It's related to the kind of news that led to me quitting when I struggled at computer science when I was getting the major. There was so much industry news that was demoralizing that I was also like, this isn't worth it. What am I doing? I'm suffering at this coding major just to get an offhand chance at getting a job that will punish me for being a fan of it, and things will all end poorly for me. So there's Felicia Day number 3. I don't know why I thought that was a gag, but there you go. There's Fortnite Felicia. This took for fucking ever to doing this thing where I'm not trying to do it in the brevity of a hotel presentation. I promise it was faster and dumber the first time, but I don't know. Just hanging out, making a video today. How you guys doing? My presentation was followed afterwards by Steve, aka Hyena Blood, which featured this slide. You can't have universal basic income because it would make society too horny. He's a graphic designer, so his entire presentation looked insane because he manually made each slide in Photoshop or some equivalent program and then just put them in to the slideshow as just bespoke images with graphic design on them and everything. A lot of it was about how about like Mr. Wolf being a sex symbol that tempts you to the dark side and so on, but it was a wild shit post. Mine was just a micro video essay by comparison to these two different variations of shit posts. But yeah, PowerPoint parties are fun. Maybe do one in the future if you have friends that are looking for something more low key to do. Like, especially if you're going to furry conventions and you're hanging out with a bunch of nerds, but you don't want to do like a loud room party or raves and other situations, but want to hang out low key in someone's hotel room. Not a bad idea of how to spend an evening. I think I think it'd be cool to do one again, honestly. And maybe you'll see the aftermath of that in the future. But I'm going to sign off. I've been doing this for way too long. I did not mean for this to be a long video. It was me representing a thing that I did in like 10 minutes before, so didn't expect that to take that long. Feel free to tell me how I'm super wrong about everything in the comments. I did not actually do basically all that much research. This thing does not, to my standards of video essays, I checked some wikis to verify some things, and that's about the level of work I went into. Whereas when I do a video essay, I do hold myself to a different standard where I stick to it for like months in most cases. But yeah, see you guys next time.